episode of Strategic Dialogue in association with USI. I'm Gauri Dwivedi, and today we will be doing a bit of crystal ball gazing ahead of India at 75. 2 years from now, as we will be celebrating our 75th anniversary of freedom, we need to, of course, address issues both internally as well as on the external environment front as well. Economic factor, of course, also needs to be dealt with. How we do it, the roadmap ahead of India at 75 is the key conversation I'm having with a very esteemed panel. Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you.
Major General BK Sharma, Director USI, Brigadier Dahiya, Council Member USI Foundation, Mr. Sanjay Baru, Distinguished Fellow USI, as well as Professor Nalapat, Editorial Director of the Sunday Guardian. As we talk about both the geopolitical factors, the internal security issues, and of course how to deal with a slowing economy, General Sharma, let me start with you, sir. First things first, we are talking about a very aggressive China in our neighborhood. And 2 years from now, if we want to set the roadmap, so to say, the first thing we'll have to, of course, address is how do we deal with our immediate neighborhood with a very belligerent Beijing, if I may say so.
Well, I would say that we had devised a very innovative neighborhood first policy. And there were lot of deliverables who were put on the table. So my guess is that whenever there is a vacuum, a larger power is going to fill that up. And much of what is happening in our neighborhood, of course, South Asia figures out very prominently in China's overall strategic calculus, because it is through South Asia that it can combine the continental part of its Belt and Road Initiative with the maritime part. The three economic corridors, China-Pakistan economic corridor, China-Nepal economic corridor, and then China-Mar economic corridor will all go into the Indian Ocean. And there are two strategic outposts there. One is Kaikfu, Bay of Bengal, and second is Gwadar. These are strategically very important. So from that perspective, and about 23 strategic infrastructure projects which it is making in the Indian Ocean region under the garb of a maritime Silk Route. So this was very, very important. Now it was for India to foresee this design and be more proactive and dynamic in balancing China out by delivering on the projects that we had promised to our neighbors. And Mr. Modi started in the right earnest by reaching out to our neighbors and, extending lines of credits and many other projects. But unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, our delivery has been slow, and that is what has given China an opportunity to make a push.
Okay.
And particularly worrisome from my perspective is, of course, Pakistan is a gone case, because no matter what you do, we will not be able to win it away. But what is happening in Bangladesh, which was very much closely aligned with India, the developments in Bangladesh are not very good. Developments in Nepal have gone against India.
I think Sri Lanka is equally worrying.
Yeah, Sri Lanka, I would say that the Rajapaksa brothers today are sitting on the fence. Earlier they had made overtures towards China.
Right.
But India also reached out, and probably they are sitting on the fence, and they will do a very fine balancing act. I just want to make a...
Yes, sir. Finish your points. Finish your points.
A last point is that Maldives is a success story here. That after they had overtly moved into the Chinese orbit, the new regime there has again moved by that India first policy, and now we have a fresh window of opportunity to reclaim our space there.
Professor Nalapat, let me bring you in, sir, and then I want to get in Mr. Baru as well on all that we wish to achieve in the last 6 years. the gaps that have been exposed, and how more than that is now being filled by BG?
Well, I'd like to say that, there's been a lot of talk in the past about how a stable Pakistan is in India's interest, quote unquote. Well, I've always felt that any Pakistan in the control of the army, which since Ziaul Haq was a Wahhabist force, is bad news for India. And frankly, a growing China is definitely bad news for India. So, that there are those who will say that if China grows, the Indian economy will grow, other economies will grow. But the reality is, for India, a growing China is not good news. And the good news that we have now is the delinking of supply chains from China, because India is the obvious destination, given some changes in policies for that. Now, I just want to say, Gauri, that the Chinese have done very well for themselves by grabbing every single opportunity that is available, by creating opportunities where that has not been available. And frankly, we have distinguished ourselves, especially in the 1950s and 60s, and in those 2 decades, by essentially turning our backs on opportunities. I mean, you had, for example, a situation in which today Nepal or Balochistan could have been, in a sense, part of India. India could have been a permanent member of the UNSC. India could have been very much in the front rank of nuclear powers.
Yes.
All these opportunities were frankly ignored by India, essentially because of this belief that India is there to make a sacrifice for the whole world. Now, I think, Gauri, it's ingrained in our psyche that sacrifice is a great thing. The more you sacrifice, the more you suffer, the better you are. I'm sorry, the Chinese have not agreed with you. They don't believe in sacrifice. They don't believe in suffering. They want a good life. And I think from what I've seen, the young generation in India, which has got more young people than any other country in the world, certainly more than China, also have the same view. So the point is, Gauri, the opportunities that we have, we should not ignore them anymore. And the Indo-Pacific is one opportunity. And very importantly, this delinking of supply chains from China is another mega opportunity that we have to grab.
I'm going to come to that supply chain in just a bit, because it's linked to the larger issue of the economic revival. But Mr. Baru, the Indo-Pacific issue that Professor Nalapat raised, and that's really one of the key issues, right? That, we cannot afford to sit on the fence anymore. We can turn around and say that we are not a claimant in the region, but the fact is that at some point of time, it will force us to take sides very clearly.
This discussion, like so many discussions, begins at the wrong end. Our problems are not outside India. Our opportunities are not outside India. To talk about China, to talk about Indo-Pacific, to talk about even our neighborhood, without first talking about what is happening in this country, I think is the wrong way of actually focusing on the challenge of this country faces. Your focus is on India at 75. Which is 2 years away. All the economic analysis that I have seen in the recent past suggest that 2 years from now, we will barely remain around $3 trillion, given the fact that this year the economy has shrunk probably by about 8%, and we will be recovering from that shrinking over the next 2 years. China is already 5 times as large as India. We are in 2 different games. Let us ask the question, what will it take India to matter in international affairs? What will it take India to be reckoned with globally? The answer is at home. If we sustain economic growth, then only, you look outside and see what are the opportunities. I mean, you asked me about Indo-Pacific. You look at a simple policy dilemma we have been dealing with, which is whether we should be members of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement or not. RCEP covers the Indo-Pacific.
Yes.
The geographical space of RCEP and the geographical space of Indo-Pacific is the same. And yet we are not prepared to join RCEP because of our inadequacies, because we don't see ourselves adequately competitive, and the areas in which we are competitive, other countries are not interested in engaging with us. So let me begin and end by saying that our challenge is at home. It has been at home for a long time. There is no point in going into prehistory. Let me end by saying one thing, that between the year 1991 and 2015, for what, 25 years, the so-called India story was based on the simple numbers that India's economic growth rate was increasing from an average of about 3.5 in 50 to 80, 5.5 from 80 to 2000, 7.5 from 2000 to 2015. Unless we return to that trajectory, we are now way below that trajectory. I have been talking to economists in the government. They tell me that for the next 5 years, we should expect an average rate of growth of 6%. That's the optimistic view. The pessimistic view is the next 5 years, it will be about 4%. So that's the range in which we are looking at. So unless you return to this trajectory, this 3.5, 5.5, 7.5, that was a trajectory we were on. You return to that, then worry about, the world, Indo-Pacific, UN Security Council, all this the stuff that international relations chaps speak about. I am an economist. I believe economy is number 1, number 2, and number 10. Only then you go to other issues.
Absolutely, sir. I agree with you there as well. And I'm not an economist per se, but yes, definitely, as somebody who studied economy, I couldn't agree more that all might flows from economic might at the end of the day. So if you are strong economically, then the world is forced to sit up and take note. Brigadier Dahiya, then, let me ask you this, that, taking on from the thread where, Mr. Baru said that if you're not going to really prosper in the next couple of years, the logical corollary to that would also be that we're not going to find a lot of money to be able to spend on our defense purchases. The last 3 months, ever since the whole Chinese threat started, the one thing we've been hearing again and again is that what stopped us from really spending on our defense purchases? The fact is we never had that kind of money. Even now we don't have. Do you think that's going to be a recurring problem going forward as well?
I think I totally agree with Baru Garu that economy lies at the front and center of all this problem, and our capability development is dependent totally on economy. But having said that, economy cannot be a unidimensional focus of any government or any country. There will be reason why economy is not doing well, or it may take for some time for economy to bounce back, and that the economists would probably know better as to how it will. I would not, as a layman, speak on that. But the fact of the matter is this, that the countries have taken their geopolitical decisions, made their geopolitical decisions, sometimes have joined wars, even when the economy was in dumps. That's a factor of necessity. If a country has to survive, and if a country has to have a place in the Committee of Nations, then it's not just economy. Economy is important. I'm not denying at all. Economy has to be good, and ultimately economy has to come good. But when the crunch comes, the security of the nation or the prestige of the nation comes before economy. And that is why what Mr. Nalapat says is absolutely right. That here is an opportunity, that there's a decoupling taking place. Now, where is our opportunity in that? Whatever is decoupling taking place, there will be some pain. We'll probably have to reduce our consumption. Consumption as it is reduced to some extent, because of the pandemic. You call it Wuhan virus, you call it China virus, just call it Corona virus. The fact of the matter is that we should be able to, at this particular time, make maximum use of the decoupling that is taking place from China. Try and be part of the supply chain, and remind you of one thing, that it is India can't take a free ride over others taking pain, and India is having a free time. The problem today is more with us. Many people are cautioning us, don't become a frontline state in the new Cold War. But the fact of the matter is, for us, it's an existential crisis that China has thrown at us, and will continue to throw at us as long as it grows at the rate that it is. I only hope with the decoupling that is going to take place, in which China itself is going to be affected sooner or later, the figures coming out from there, maybe because of any reasons, maybe because of false figures or anything like that, I don't believe that China is going to remain unscathed from this. And the decoupling might not just take place 6 months' time. It may take 2 years. It may take 4 years.
Right.
But I think this is also the time we have to take hard decisions. And I totally agree with Mr. Nalapat when he says that we have to take a call now. And the time of being squeamish, the time when we thought,
right. Okay. Okay. All right. I think. All right. Okay. Then let me ask this to both Professor Nalapat and Mr. Baru about the issue of, how can we really address the issue of stagnating economy and the massive challenge of job losses that stares us right now. Mr. Baru, to you first, sir.
Well, for example, you're talking about supply chains, which is to bring in foreign investment into India. We have opened the doors. We opened the doors for foreign investment. Why is it not coming? Why is it that we do not have a single new greenfield project on the ground in manufacturing? The share of manufacturing in national income was 16% in 2006 and remains 16% today. There are serious challenges of domestic policy which have to be addressed. The business that is going out of China is going to Vietnam, is going to Indonesia, is going to Malaysia. It's not coming to India yet. It's even going to Bangladesh. Back to the same point, I have no problem saying if there somebody enters your territory, you have to go to war. Fine, but there are economic consequences of that. The impact of the wars of 62 and 65, Indian economy felt for the next 10 years. And people should not forget the hyperinflation of the early 70s after the Bangladesh war, and then the emergency that came as a consequence of the social and political destabilization that happened because of all the adverse consequences of those three wars. So the economy will suffer. And you go back one more step. What is this great opportunity in decoupling that is new? I have not understood. Chinese and Americans are having a problem with each other. What is the opportunity for India that did not exist earlier? India's problems are at home to increase manufacturing. You talked about job losses.
Yes.
In media, people are losing jobs. I know dozens of young people have lost jobs. And
yes.
You are in a serious economic crisis, not because the world has pushed you into this crisis, because there is a domestic, stagnation. Demand is not picking up. People are holding back on money. There is increased uncertainty because of COVID.
Yes.
So I think we have a serious domestic economic challenge which needs to be first addressed. And once we address that challenge, whatever the opportunities the world presents us, we will be able to take advantage of that.
Nalapat sir, you want to add on the front as far as the economy, which really is a serious challenge right now?
Well, Gauri, I only, Sanjay is absolutely right. We need a high rate of growth. And I think some of us have been shouting ourselves hoarse that you need double-digit growth for a century. For at least a tenth of a century, if you want to really do a lot of social justice. About RCEP, frankly, I'm not convinced, because we have bilateral trade deals with almost all the countries who are part of RCEP, barring China. And if China were playing fair, it's a different matter. But we have seen in WTO, China does not play fair. So they'll use RCEP to further come into India. And if I may remind everybody here, the reality is that many Indian businesses have found it's a very easy thing to basically become importers, import agents for Chinese products into India. They have demolished home competition. They have demolished local alternatives, and they are making a lot of money, and the Chinese are making even more money. So frankly, RCEP, in my view, there's only one country that's very, very interested in RCEP, and that is not India, but China. Secondly, yes, I agree. Frankly, we should be concerned with ourselves. India first, as Sanjay very correctly, implies. But the reality is we're living in a global world, and we can't ignore that. So I again go back to what some of us have been saying for a long time about minimum government and maximum governance that the Prime Minister has talked about. In India, in the system, and Sanjay has been part of the government system, he knows from the inside, every file goes through about 10, 12 different layers. And frankly, if you're a foreign competitor or if you're somebody who's not very proficient, you can derail a good Indian competitor by entering any one of those layers and creating a problem. Then, of course, frankly, we have some of the best judges in the world, and they're extremely hardworking. But also the reality is that the Indian judicial system is so wide open, anyone can use it to ensure that, again, projects are held up for a long period of time. I want to remind you, Gauri, that yes, Sanjay is absolutely right. We must have growth. There are some more than 300 to 350 million young Indians. And if we don't provide them jobs, things are going to be a little difficult in India. I agree, frankly, that since about 2011, I would like to say, the situation in India economically has not been very good. But I think the replies to that are, now when I talk about using opportunity, it's also an opportunity for governance reform. And I again fully endorse Sanjay. Governance reform is at the key to progress and prosperity in India.
Absolutely. And now, taking a view of some of the other issues back home itself, which is where I want to get in, General Sharma, sir, your home state and now the home UT of Jammu Kashmir. 2 years from now, if we look, it's going to be 3 years as far as abrogation of Article 370 is concerned. Hopefully, there'll be a clarity as far as delimitation is concerned. And, some of the other issues. When you talk about internal matters, apart from economy, there is also the internal security factor. Do you think a roadmap there has to now be established?
Yes, I have always said that, J&K is extremely important from the strategic security point of view. And unfortunately, we've always looked at it as political mathematics and dealt with the J&K state from political expediency and not as a national security issue. Now, post 370, let me give you some inputs. While outwardly people may make a lot of noise, but internally the people have reconciled to a new normal. That Article 370 is there to stay, and similarly, Domicile Act and Delimitation Act may be emotive, but they have become secondary issues there. The primary issue there is of sustainable security, and again, there has been a dip in infiltration. And presently, you have very few residual terrorists there, and they are short of weapons and all. But Pakistan's propaganda factory, which has the Maulvis, the school teachers, and certain people within the government establishment, the educated middle class, that is very much intact there. But the big bugbear there is today, there are two bugbears. One is misgovernance and second is corruption. In misgovernance, we've not been able to, reboot the administration there, and there is a disconnect between the administration and the people there. That's a very big problem, and people have been complaining about, overbearing and highly demanding and corrupt bureaucracy, which doesn't understand the psychology of the people. And second is rampant corruption. As it was a very corrupt state, corruption has increased manifold, be it Corona Fund, be it employee insurance or any other schemes. Then, because of Corona, we've not been able to launch some of those projects like Atmanirbhar plan of Prime Minister, those 20,000 crore rupees and all. There have been no visible high impact projects which are there. Unemployment remains what it is. So from my point of view, in next 2 years, what is most important is good governance and extremely good delivery of the projects, and the projects like this railroad reaching there by 2020 is one. Then making metro railway system in Jammu and Srinagar, the smart city, employment rallies and engagement with youth is extremely important. If you categorize the youth there, because I know the state very well, approximately 65% people are still very, very alienated. But there are about 25% educated people who have reconciled to the idea of New India and Naya Bharat and Naya Kashmir.
Yes.
And there are 10% people who have always been pro-India and nationalistic. Now we need to reach out to these people and expand this circle, and there is an engagement. In terms of political rebooting, the most important aspiration there is restoration of statehood. But presently, people have lost total faith in the dynastic politics there. And they also are not very happy with the new dispensation that Jammu and Kashmir, Apni Party. Therefore, some kind of innovation is required to reboot the political process at the grassroots level.
Okay.
These are some of the suggestions that I offer.
Brigadier Dahiya, then let me ask you, when you talk about internal security, the Northeast is another piece that probably needs some greater focus, especially in the wake of how the Chinese have been dealing with the entire area.
That's all of us are aware that China had a foot in the door a long time back. Thereafter, the overt support has been missing. But we also know that people like Paresh Barua and all have been there in Rueli in China, just across the Myanmarese border. Recent reports also suggest the foreign affairs of NSCNI and Han She, their army chief, that some people say they are in Myanmar and others say that they have gone and met Paresh Barua. Recently, NSC and Khaplang has further split, and one of the groups which had Konyak Semas, led by Nikki Sumi, has further parted ways from them, and Khaplang's nephew Tom is the boss there. It is reported that he is now providing support to NSN-IM, which means that NSN-IM cadres can go and make use of the camps of the NSCN-K across into the Myanmarese territory, and China may be covertly doing it, they may start overtly doing it in case our standoff with China continues. Is hesitant that in the next 2 years, we resolve outstanding problems in the region.
Right.
Paresh Barua, to my mind, let me start one by one. Paresh Barua, to my mind, will be hardly effective if the political stability continues in Assam.
Right.
The process was going on very well, but because of the national registers and the CAA, because it affects Assam differently, so because of that, the whole problem again, somehow the progress stalled. I suppose that the elections are coming up next year.
Yes.
And I think some of these divisive issues will be downplayed.
Okay.
And Paresh Barua will not be that effective. And I suppose that the Ulfa problem will somehow be sorted out.
All right. Okay.
As far as Meghalaya is concerned,
I think there's a bit of an audio issue with Brigadier Dahiya. As we wrap up, I want to quickly ask 30 seconds to all three of you that, that one big factor that you think we need to do now, the one big reform that is most important. Mr. Baru, starting with you, sir. Crisp answer, please.
One big reform. I mean, the government has to start spending money. It has to end this phase of uncertainty. People are not sure what next year would be. There's a lot of uncertainty in the minds of investors, in the minds of consumers, in the minds of employees, in the minds of students. This uncertainty has to end. And it's the responsibility of a government in any modern economy to address this problem of uncertainty.
All right. Mr. Nalapat, sir. Briefly, sir.
Well, I fully agree with Sanjay on this. And I want to point out that when India became independent, there was a lot of hope. But what did the Prime Minister do? He said, yes, fine, but everything will be directed through the government. And in the government, everything is directed through certain services, which are watertight compartments. I think, Mr. Baru is well aware about how watertight these compartments are. Frankly, it's time for a major thoroughgoing reform of the administration. One, trust the people. Don't allow everything to be done through the needle of the government. Allow people more freedom and give them more rights, give them more empowerment.
Yes.
And secondly, involve outside people in the different civil services, at least to the extent of a quarter, in my view, half. I mean, you know, when we have a Sanjay Baru there,
Yes.
for example, it's a plus, it's not a minus.
Absolutely.
It improves the system. So I'd like to see thoroughgoing administrative reform, the end of these silos, and the end
Yes.
of these monopolies.
General Sharma, very briefly, sir, that one big decision that you would want the government to take.
Yes, it's high time that we make a national security strategy, even if it is in the classified domain. And second is, even our higher defense or security architecture still requires a lot of reforms to build in more synergy and integration, so that, you know, we are able to optimize our comprehensive national power and deal with this Pak-China nexus and other security threats in a more comprehensive manner.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. There was a lot of ground to cover, but we managed at least to address most of the challenges. Now, as they say, proof of the pudding lies only when you eat it. So it really remains to be seen as to how many of these challenges and the roadmap that all of you have identified is actually adhered to, and those changes are implemented. Thanks much for joining in this very special conversation.